So what do people think of the lighting at the front here with these black lights? Does this help or not help?
That one's just. I can't really do it.
So, do you want to turn them off or do you want to reorient them? What do you think?
Can you tilt it up?
No, not like that.
Tilt it up.
Yeah.
Good. Definitely.
No, it doesn't have anything that does anything.
Keep them on. Keep them on. Take it off.
Okay, so today we're going to hear from the fourth lecture, I think.
Sorry.
So we're going to hear from you all of you today, I hope, in the fourth lecture in the series. The fifth?
But you were right.
I'm not counting right.
No, you're counting very right. It is the fourth lecture. Because I'm running a little bit behind. So we'll just do another one someday. I'm sure that will Okay. So yesterday we were talking about this mutation selection balance, and I tried to argue that you may expect some generalized situation where both beneficial, deleterious, and a few where influx of deleterious mutations and slower influx of beneficial mutations together will reach mutation selection balance, but of a dynamic kind, where any particular lineage ends up mediocre on the strength of being clobbered by deleterious mutations, but by then new, better lineages arise with the help of a few beneficial mutations, and the whole thing is constantly turning over, but is in a dynamic mutation selection balance. And I argue that that state where a few beneficial mutations coming in compensate many deleterious mutations coming in can be expected to be a stable evolutionary equilibrium. And some people came up to me and said, well, but shouldn't we evolve continuously and continuously get better? And they were very upset with the notion that evolution would just stop and treadmill somewhere, so we have to go forward. So let's talk about adaptation. It's certainly possible to enter a new environment. And so yesterday, remember, at the very beginning I said, imagine the situation where environment is stationary long enough for this sort of treadmilling to equilibrate. Well, it's certainly possible. It happens all the time. The environment changes, and then the system has to adapt. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about adaptation. In an asexual population. And yesterday we discussed a lot what happens with deleterious mutations, with few beneficial mutations, but for now let's just focus on beneficial mutations only. And again, we're going to make sort of a simple an oversimplification to the spectrum of mutations, and just say that there is a beneficial mutation rate. Let's call it mu sub b, and I'm going to drop this subscript very soon. I'll get tired of it, but never mind, we'll only have beneficial mutations for a little while. These beneficial mutations will have all the same strength, positive S. So the fitness will be increasing by S every time mutation comes in. And of course, as usual, we assume that every mutation is different, but will have the same effect. So suppose we have a population of a fixed size capital N. And this is time. And suppose initially all these individuals are identical, and then one of them at some point in time acquires a mutation, and this is a beneficial mutation. It is lucky enough not to be extinguished by stochastic drift in the very beginning of its life. Well, very few of them. And so now we have a new genotype, let's call it A. And we start with O. And right, so now the fitness here is plus S, and everybody again is identical, and another mutation comes in. Let's call it B. So now the genotype is AB, and the fitness is plus 2S, and so on and so forth. And how does the average fitness in the population increase? Well, every time mutation comes in, it increases by S. So the rate, the influx of mutations is mu times the population size. Anyone here can mutate. And it will increase fitness by S. And the only subtlety is, remember, that non-extinction probability. So this mutation has to establish in the population and sort of multiply to the number where stochastic fluctuations are not terribly important, and then selection will act essentially deterministically. So this probability of fixation or non-extinction, the same thing, so we'll call it non-extinction, which we already calculated once, is also equal to S. So that's our answer, mu n S squared. And I'll call this rate of change of mean fitness the velocity, so the speed of adaptation. So great. So only the problem here is that we've assumed that these selective sweeps, right? This event would be called effective sweep, happen to occur rarely enough not to overlap, which is basically a statement that mu n times this non-extinction probability, S, has to be smaller than the time it takes to sweep, right? So what's the time it takes to sweep? Well, this is exponential growth here. So the time is going to be 1 over the rate of exponential growth times the logarithm of the population size. Okay, this is the time, and here I want the rate, so it's S of log n. Well, so S disappears here and there, so we're basically comparing n to 1 over log n. It doesn't take very much. So even if mu is 10 to the minus 3 or 10 to the minus 5, which would be rather low, it still won't take too large a population before we'll get into a situation where mutations occur essentially simultaneously in many different individuals. So now we have this other situation where many mutations start coming in. I should be drawing a different color. And I'm getting tired of drawing them. So you see, very different situation. have many more mutations, but it's difficult for all of them to sweep at the same time because they start competing with each other. So we're in a situation where we expect most of the new mutations will be lost. So that basically means that as the population size increases, even though the rate with which new baby mutations are coming into a population increases linearly with population size, the average, so most of them never get to grow up. Most of these mutations never get to be incorporated into the genome, the common genome, so consensus genome of the population, right? So they get lost. So this phenomenon is called clonal competition. Is it me or is it the clock? Clonal competition. So it is a little surprising, since in population genetics, and certainly the mathematical end of population genetics has been developing for more than well, I guess 100 years, that we haven't really had a quantitative description of this clonal competition until, I don't know, 10 years ago. Much of the classical population genetics was developed under the assumption that selective effects are rare, and most of the variation that one sees is neutral. Now we know that it is often demonstrably not true in the data. So one of the papers that we were reading about HIV very explicitly demonstrates that there are lots of mutations segregating the population at the same time. And then okay, so let's go through. So let's analyze the situation using this Adaptation model. And that's actually 2007. And I think yesterday I said that I can do this in 7 minutes. So let's think of what the population is like at one time slice, right? So we have many clones here. They're diverse, and they have different mutations. And the effect of mutation is additive. So when you add many numbers, you expect distribution to be close to the Gaussian. So we're going to assume that the distribution is Gaussian, and so this is the fitness distribution. This is just a time slice. This is going to be F bar at a given time slice. And let's just look at deterministic dynamics. F minus F bar of t and of x of t. So this deterministic dynamics accepts a very simple Gaussian solution. You just stick this in and verify this. and there is a solution, with f bar t equal to some velocity times t. So this is a traveling wave solution. Yeah. So next moment over is going to shift. Okay? And the velocity here is equal to sigma squared to the variance. So that, of course, is what Fisher's theorem dictates. Easy to show. The only thing the solution doesn't tell us is what sigma squared is, or what the velocity is, because the solution exists for any sigma and any velocity. So what we need to figure out is what is v, or equivalently, what is sigma squared. And of course, the reason that you have a solution with any velocity is that this is a deterministic limit, which is only valid in the limit of population size going to infinity, which is to say it is Gaussian and continues off to infinity. And the selection.
So why don't we get the mutation term in the equation?
Not yet. Not yet.
Well, how does the wave move forward then?
Just a second. You're from Stanford. You don't count. So, right? So this basically describes no mutation, only selection. And the way the wave here moves forward is some minute amount of stuff way ahead of the wave is getting pulled up by selection. And as people from Stanford know, for a finite population, there is nobody sampled in the tail of the Gaussian. So in the finite population, there is a nose to this distribution. And the nose distribution is basically a bin with the total population of more than 1. Right? And in order for the wave to really move forward, we need mutations. So it is the mutation term, which is not here, that's going to determine the speed of evolution. Well, some mutations, of course, are going to occur in all of these bins. What Desai and Fisher realized was that most of these baby mutations are not going to make it in the population. And only the ones that occur in the top bin on the best genotype. Only those ones are going to sweep the population. Right? So, effectively, the typical lineages here are living dead. They're going straight to extinction. And only the best genotype present in the population is going to have offspring that will take over. So in that sense, it is a very similar situation to what we had yesterday in this mutation selection balance. Again, only the top bin so genotype in the top bin has a future. Okay, so let's now calculate the rate of adaptation. So we want to know the characteristic time or the rate for seeding new bins ahead of the distribution. Well, this rate is proportional to mutation rate, proportional to the size of the population in this top bin, and it becomes important to know where exactly this top bin is. So Well, of course, where it is relative to the mean in the population. So it's delta F max that we want. Alright. So n at delta F max times the establishment probability, which itself is delta F max. Well, that's the rate, but we also need to know what the population of that top bin should be. Well, the population of the top bin, which is seeding best genotypes, can be very large because it itself was just very freshly seeded, right? So the time that it has been evolving itself is essentially the same tau, right? The whole thing has to, on average, occur steadily, right? We're looking for the steady state adaptation. So we got exponential growth here, time tau, and I think it wasn't yesterday, it was the day before yesterday, we actually calculated the probability distribution of having a given n number of individuals in the process like that, and conditional on establishment, it was on average given by this exponential, but it was a little bit larger than that. It was larger by exactly delta F max. So now we put these two things together. I substitute this into that. Actually, delta F cancels. I have tau inverse mu E. Yeah, I'm good. Delta F max tau. Okay? So this looks like an equation for tau inverse. And it is, except for it's this tau that really matters. So what we want to do is just take the logarithm and rewrite it like this. Tau 1 over delta F m log mu tau. Right, and then a thing like this we can always solve just by iteration. Just substitute this tau in there. Delta Fm log delta Fm over mu times more logs somewhere. I guess downstairs. But you know how it said that chicken is not a bird and the logarithm is not a function. The logarithm is just a number here. It can be very big, can be very, very small. So we're going to just brutally truncate this and do the calculation what we call sort of up to inner logs. We're going to keep the logs, but not too many of them. Okay. So what have we got? So we calculated the rate with which new things come in. So we can basically calculate velocity because we're assuming a steady state. So every time a new bin comes in a time scale tau, the whole wave moves over by s. So here we are. At the same time, we've calculated the width of the distribution, sigma squared. And what we have is S delta Fm over log delta Fm over mu. Well, and you look at this, and you may ask, so where is the great accomplishment? Because we still don't know where the nose of the distribution is. Right? We still don't know what this delta Fm is. So we need just a little bit more work, but clearly what we've done here, we've admittedly very approximately analyzed what's happening at the leading edge of the distribution. But we also know what the distribution, that the traveling wave is way back. It's this Gaussian. And I guess I should remember to put in the factor of n here. And right, just the normalization. So we need to match the height of the top bin here that we've estimated to the rest of the Gaussian. And that will basically tell us where it sits relative to the Gaussian. That will determine delta Fm for us. So the last step is match to Gaussian. So, and delta Fm. On one hand, it's given by this expression. So it's mu tau delta Fm. But on the other hand, it's what Gaussian tells us it should be. And that's n e to the minus delta Fm squared over 2 sigma squared. And we're going to pi here. Sigma, and I guess to get dimensions right, to remember that our bin outside this. Okay? And now we've got another equation right here. Right, we can eliminate tau. We've already calculated it in terms of delta Fm. So this equation determines delta Fm for us. And I'll spare you a little bit of blackboard arithmetic. Right? You just saw this. And what can I erase? What you find is, okay. So you solve this. We calculate the delta Fm, and you substitute it into our nice expression for the velocity here. And what the sign Fisher got was log and mu over 2 log and mu s. You know what? Let me not annoy you with stuff. So, some number in here. 4 squared over s m over mu and more logs. Okay. So the important thing here is that whereas for small populations, rate of adaptation is linear in population size. For large populations, the rate saturates, becomes logarithmic. Okay, so that's global competition for you. I think this is a good point for me to ask for questions. So how are we doing? That took more than 7 minutes.
Can you say again why
Okay, don't think of this as sigma squared. Think of this as velocity. Right? We're calculating with velocity. And every time we establish a new bin, we take one step of size s forward. Right? And now Fisher's theorem tells us that the velocity also happens to be sigma squared. But Fisher's theorem, it's just this solution that we found that equation, which relates to this. Okay. Good. Okay.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
So, I imagine this model is self-consistent and such that if you looked at the second to the bin one step away from the nose, the mutations there wouldn't have a good chance of taking over everything. But if we were to do some experiments on this, I mean, one could easily imagine some sort of drift effects that means more than the nose contributes to what's going on. See, I'm just curious about how valid this is.
Right. So this is just a simple model, right? And as we discussed yesterday, distribution of mutation effects. Who knows what it is, but it can have long tails and whatnot. And right, so the moment you have long tail, you have to start worrying, right? And basically what's going to happen is, okay, if you don't have a terribly long tail, and by that I mean something so much wider than the distribution,
Right.
then this analysis will be more or less.
Even if you have a constant S, you can still get guys that will eventually
Of course.
fix that come from that distribution.
Of course, of course, of course. And in fact, this isn't quite the Fisher result because I have to simplify to
The paper
get
is
into
pages long. So.
right into 7 minutes. Yeah. So one actually worries about this.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But the really big worry. So again, all this is ultimately chicken feed in here. But the big worry is rare large mutations, where this whole thing will kind of make a jump and start a new seed, right? And if you have rather frequent large jumps, there is sort of a nasty intermediate regime where the distribution actually fluctuates a lot, right? So I just gave you the argument for basically mean velocity, but there is another calculation which is much harder than this, where you try to calculate fluctuations in the velocity. Okay. Am I good? Can I erase? As you correctly point out, this is oversimplified and whatnot, but nevertheless gives you a pretty good idea of a phenomenon which is a non-trivial phenomenon due to interactions between different alleles, different mutations coming in. So the classic argument is that that's where sex comes in and helps. Because if there is sexual reproduction, then you may have some two genotypes here, X and Y on two different mutations coming in different individuals. They're both wonderful mutations, and these mutations can meet somewhere, right over here, and make friends, and produce an offspring. with a recombined genotype X and Y, right? And now, even if the parents go extinct, their recombinant has a chance, right? So now there is a mechanism of bringing mutations that arise in different individuals, arise in different genetic backgrounds. There's a mechanism for bringing them together and assembling them into a superfit genotype. So now you can imagine that if this occurs sufficiently rapidly, you can completely restore the linear dependence here, and linear dependence in population size, and no good mutation needs ever be lost. Well, maybe, but one actually has to try to calculate it. And again, that wasn't really done until very recently. So I really have very little time. Okay, so let's do now adaptation with sense. But, so again, we're going to consider the same model, only beneficial mutations of the same effect. And instead of modeling the full recombination, which depends on the chromosomal position, we'll take a very simplistic model where some parental genotypes basically get reassorted. So if my papa genotype is a collection of alleles like this, and mama genotype is a collection of alleles like that, we'll say that they get together and make an offspring genotype where individual allele either comes from the father or comes from the mother. So, and like these size take values 1 or 0 at random. Okay. And our fitness is going to be basically governed by the linear model, additive model like this. And in fact, particularly simple, if you let's say all alleles have the same fitness S. Okay? But we'll also be thinking about a situation where the number of loci that contribute is very, very large. Right? And again, the distribution of fitness in the population for reasons of central limit theorem is going to be Gaussian with some width. And with this simple model of recombination, or rather reassortment, you can ask, what happens, what is the offspring fitness condition on the fitness of the parents being F prime and F double prime? And I was actually going to do it in Blackboard, I don't have time. So I'll just tell you, you can show following. The fitness of the offspring. Wait. One of these. Okay, I'm not going to normalize it. The fitness of the offspring is Gaussian distributed around parental mean. Mean parental fitness. With a variance that is half the variance of the population as a whole. You can derive it, this is homework. And then our mean field dynamics for the population can be written in the following way. So we still have selection, right? Business as usual. But now, in addition, we're going to have a recombination term, and this recombination term takes, again, this is mean field here. Parental genotypes, basically samples possible parents, and averages over possible choices of the parents. And I should conserve probabilities. You can show that this equation also has a Fisher-Tropling solution. Just like before, bt.
What is R again?
Rate of recombination, sorry. Rate of recombination. Well, it is really said rate of reassortment, rate of the frequency of mating. Okay. 2 sigma squared, and again d is equal to sigma squared. Okay. So we got some mean field traveling my solution, and we have the same conundrum that it exists for any variance, and the velocity is still not determined. And again, as before, of course, this is happening because the velocity ultimately is set by the mutational flux, and as before, we have to calculate establishment probability for new mutations. So again, we have this equation. So mu n s, that's the mutational flux, and then we need this p non-extinction. I should have given myself a little bit more room. So, B, mu, and S, P, non-extinct. So let's try to understand what's going on here. So suppose a new mutation comes in on this background. And suppose it did not extinguished right away. And it is sitting on this background, so it is better than average. So it starts growing as a clone. So I'm drawing some pretty pictures. So now this is time for me, and this is the number of copies and number of individuals carrying that new allele. So it is prospering in the population, it is spreading. The only problem is that there are other new mutations coming in on different backgrounds. The whole wave is shifting. So this fitness wave is passing by, and if you're too long, our allele finds itself sitting on the background that's worse than average. So if it's sitting on the background that's worse than average, the population starts collapsing. So it's going extinct simply because its time has passed. It's not the best anymore. The only way this allele can still survive in the population is by recombining, marrying well, right? Recombining onto a better genetic background. So, because recombination has been going on all this time, well, there are actually a bunch of recombinants that it may have created that gone from the background F0 to F1, F2, F3, and so on. And so some of these backgrounds will be better, some of these backgrounds will be worse. One has to take chances, but with a little bit of luck, some of these offspring will land on the backgrounds that are sufficiently good, at least for a little while into the future, right? And then, of course, this process continues, so the babies continue having babies, and off it goes. And the game is to stay surfing on this traveling wave forever, right? So that's what we need to calculate. What's the probability of staying with a wave forever? Well, the probability of staying with a wave forever is 1 minus the probability of falling off, right? So let's calculate probability of, okay. So we started with some background F naught here. Am I changing notation here? Probably. We call this extinction probability. For an allele that starts on the background F0. So what is that extinction probability? Well, it might get extinct basically right away. And that probability is 1 minus delta F0. We're assuming that, I don't know, let me get the problem. We're assuming that delta F is much smaller than 1. Otherwise, we would have written it as 1 plus delta F. Okay. If that's the story is over. Now, suppose that it didn't get extinct right away. What happens then? Well, then it has a chance to recombine and have a bunch of babies. So there'll be some probability of it having K babies. This probability will depend on its background. Poisson type thing. So minus K fancy way of writing 1. This thing is identically, right, so far it's all just adds up to 1. We haven't done anything. But what we want to calculate is the extinction probability. So now what we want to really calculate is the probability that all of these K babies become extinct. So phi f sub I, product over all the babies from 0 to K. The only thing is we don't quite know which backgrounds they land on. So we have to average over all possible backgrounds. And the way we're going to average over all possible backgrounds is using our formula here. Right? Of course, we know the fitness, well, we know the fitness of one of the ancestors, and we don't know the fitness of the other parent, but we're going to assume that the other parent is just sampled from the background distribution. So maybe I should write it. So we're going to average in the following way. So this is conditional on F and conditional on F double prime, and this F double prime is going to be sampled from the population. So we got ourselves an equation. Big long equation. So you can solve this.
What's gamma?
Thank you very much. Right. So the gamma, of course, depends on the size of this clone. Right? So gamma basically so gamma of F is e to the delta F t minus v t squared. Okay. So this exponential e to the delta F t, right, would be steady exponential growth under selection, right, delta F. Right? And this comes from the fact that the wave is passing by. Right? So the real fitness, so the absolute fitness of, no, sorry, not absolute, but the differential fitness of our clone is decreasing as linearly with time, right, with velocity v. I'm rushing here a little bit, so I don't think I can, I don't have that much time. I think, in fact, I have 2 minutes. So maybe I can explain it in more detail to the person asking the question at lunch. But anyway, so there is a number that goes in here, and one can turn the crank and get to the answer, and what one finds is that this now survival probability, which is 1 minus the extinction probability, function of f looks like sort of a very steep function in the region where it's important. And then we have to average over that with respect to the population distribution. Right. And that will get us our non-extinction probability. P non-extinction is df and f 1 minus phi f. And that's what we needed to know. And so the only thing is, of course, this depends on everything. This depends on sigma. This depends, well, it doesn't depend on everything. It depends on sigma. It depends on R. So we have an equation to solve, mu n s p non-extinction sigma and R. And what you'll find is the following answer. D equal to. So there are two regimes. If R is sufficiently large, it's not really obvious the condition here, but you just have to trust me. Yeah. So for sufficiently frequent recombination, one indeed recovers linear dependence on mutational influx. But more realistically, one has a longer and mu S. Right, so this is basically small and mu on the log n. So velocity as a function of R, no, excuse me, as a function of n mu, starts going up linearly and then crosses over to a logarithm. But the point where this crossover occurs depends on R, depends on the rate of recombination. So for higher rate of recombination, the crossover occurs later. So that's basically your benefit of sex. We did not recover all of the competing beneficial mutations, but we have recovered them. So I have successfully run out of time, and but at least I think I explained something. So let me just summarize. We've introduced actually a very useful concept here, and sort of non-trivial method of calculating. And if you really want to understand, going back to the asexual calculation, I said that the Simon Fisher were clever enough to realize that only the top bin contributes to long-term inheritance. But that, one can actually just calculate. One can do arithmetic. So one can do calculation this style, except our new babies here, instead of being recombinants, will just be mutations. And clearly you can do this, right? If we could do this with some crazy recombination kernel, then you can also do it with a crazy mutation kernel. So we actually have a means of calculating for a broad class of models. And this long-term non-extinction is a very interesting concept in itself. So we think of fitness as being the thing, right? And fitness is very short-term, right? It's the rate of growth today, right? But the environment might be changing. Or the adaptation wave might be sweeping by, right? What you really want to know is whether your genetic material is going to propagate to infinity, contingent on all kinds of things that may happen in between, right? So here, these all kinds of things were sort of particularly simple kind of things, right? That was just a very steady progression of the background average fitness. But you can generalize this and start using this machinery to talk about changing environments. You can start talking about benefit of recombination, even though in the present generation, so in the next generation, recombination may just be alone, right? But if it helps the survival of your alleles, at least some fraction of your genome, to infinity, then it may persist to infinity. So, that, I guess, is a useful tidbit from this lecture. And, well, population genetics in the last few years has really been an exciting field. Propelled actually by the possibility of actually testing these ideas. Right? It's not that one couldn't do the arithmetic 50 years ago, but perhaps there wasn't quite the motivation for doing so. And in particular, we didn't know that this low mutation rate limit, so the limit where only a few alleles under selection at any given time, is not really sufficient. But from reading the papers that you're going to brilliantly present tomorrow, you'll see that now there is experimental evidence that much of the world exists in that regime where you have to worry about interactions. So we have to understand interactions, and we have to think about the effect of many weak alleles that live in this range. We have to worry about their interaction on the genome. We have to worry about interaction effects in the genotype-phenotype relation that I didn't get to talk about, right? This model, again, was making some very simplified assumptions. One can go beyond that. And ultimately, that's where statistical genetics is coming in. So statistical genetics comes in when we move from the world where beneficial mutations were few and far apart, so that the relevant genes ultimately, relevant loci on the genome, were few and had big effects. And then you discover that particular locus that causes some disease. You identify the protein, you demonstrate that it is responsible for the phenotype that you're worried about. you name the gene, you publish a few papers in Nature, and that's the way science progresses. In a way, so the nightmare scenario is following. So I know that I'm running over time. Okay, just 2 minutes, please. Otherwise, I do something. So the nightmare scenario is the following. So I told you in the first lecture that there are a million polymorphisms that make any pair of us different. So 1 million polymorphisms. I told you that the threshold of neutrality is 1 of the population size. So population in genetics is argued that human population size for much of its evolution, obviously not now, was 10 to the 4, 10,000 breeding population. So, which means that the fitness differential of 1 over 10,000 is neutral, basically unmeasurable, right? But now we got a million of them. Well, some of them are going to be positive, some of them are going to be negative. So we have to add them up incoherently, right? So the total effect of all of these things is going to be the square root of 10 to the 6 times 10 to the minus 4. That's 0.1, right? So I've just taken a legally neutral polymorphisms, right? The stuff that you'll never be able to measure this fitness differential in the lab. You will never be able to prove that any of these alleles has an effect, right? And together, they give a 0.1 fitness differential between any pair of individuals. This is big time. So how does one deal with this nightmare scenario, right? We'll never be able to publish a Nature paper about polymorphism with this effect. It'll be rejected. It's not of general interest, right? But some of us think that the situation is not without hope. Just like with thermodynamics, there can be not emergent complexity, but emergent simplicity, where you have so many little effects working together or against each other, we can hope for emergent simplicity. And I want to leave you on this optimistic note. I think we should really
Take one
keep
quick
the
question
questions
while stepping out. Yeah, so one question.
So, in your second term here, so why is there not an S squared division?
The second term is lost.
Second term, so why is there not an S squared?
S squared. Sorry, S squared. Where's S squared?
The second term, one.
Yeah. You have to replace by R. You have to replace by R squared. So it's not true. So if you like, it's S squared multiplied by R squared over S squared.
Okay, but so in the case of a combination, if R equals to 0, it actually reduced to the asexual case. But
It's
here,
a very non-trivial. Very non-trivial.
Okay.
You can't just.
Yeah, but you can't. You can't do that.
well, it's not later.
Yeah.